years ago, the rock group, and headed by Justin Hayward, said this: why do we never get an answer when we're knocking on the door with 1,000 million questions about hate and death and war? Because when we stop and look around us, there's nothing that we need in a world of persecution that is whirling in its greed. Why do we never get an answer when we're knocking on the door? And I want to respond to that right in the beginning. This is a legitimate question being raised by the skeptic. Why does the church not try to answer this? When prophets themselves raised the question. Habakkuk raised it. How long will you stand by and we cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you look at injustice for so long? Why do the innocent suffer and the law is paralyzed? Jeremiah raised the question. Moses raised the question. And so even prophetic voices raise this. And so when a music group says, why do we never get an answer when we're knocking at the door? It is a question that is at the door of the church. It is a question at the door of your mind and my mind as a believer. An existentialist put it this way, and I think it's worthy of listening to what he's saying. Really, it is not science that has led me to doubt the purpose of God. It is the state of this world. It is this pitiless, unending struggle for existence among the nations. It is the collapse of our idealisms before the brute facts of force and chaos. Somehow there seems a radical twist in the very constitution of the universe, which will always defeat man's hopes, make havoc of his dreams, and bring his pathetic optimism crashing in disaster. Purpose, look at the world, that settles it for me. So he is not positing science against faith or anything as such. He just says there's a strange twist in the very nature of this universe. That settles it for me. It seems to bring our pathetic optimism constantly crashing in disaster. So the first point I presented to you is the reality of this. It is clearly presented in a whole litany of tragedies and atrocities. Second is the universality of the problem. This is not the private problem of the Christian or the private question of the atheist. It is a question and a problem for every human being. Gautama Buddha, for example, he used the word dukkha. If you and I were to go back to the rationalists like René Descartes, he said something like this: I think, therefore I am. Gautama Buddha would have said, suffering is, therefore suffering exists. He wouldn't even have said I. He wouldn't even have brought the personal first person into the picture. According to Descartes, his existence was defined by the fact that he doubted, and because he doubted, he was sure he actually existed. Buddha would have said, I'm not even sure of the I. All I know is suffering exists. Suffering exists. It is a strong word in Pali and then in Hindi. It is the word dukkha. It is not just sorrow. It is not just pain. It wraps in the angst of human existence. Anguish exists. Suffering exists. The entire edifice of Buddhism is built on that first premise: suffering exists. How do we deal with suffering? So whether you talk to the Buddhist or you talk to the pantheist in general or you talk to the skeptic, it is the universality of the problem. So door number one, they run into problems. Door number two, they run into problems. Door number three, if God is powerful, why could he not have made us always choose good? There's a brilliant book, by the way, written by Alvin Plantinga, possibly the best known Protestant philosopher in America today, if not one of the finest in the world, in his book on the problem of evil. And he brilliantly lays it out. But what he basically says in one of his major arguments is this. It's very complicated, but he basically says something like this. He says, God cannot do that which is mutually exclusive. God cannot do that which is mutually exclusive. God cannot draw a square circle. So when we say God is omnipotent, God is all-powerful, be careful what we mean by that. God does not do that which is mutually exclusive. Think of it, if God can do that which is mutually exclusive, there's nothing wrong with the problem of evil either. He can do whatever he wants. So what God is doing then is presenting to us the most noble of all ethics. And the most noble of all ethics is simply this, that you cannot love without having the freedom to not love. You cannot love without having the freedom to not love. Even Jean-Paul Sartre, the atheistic existentialist, granted this. He said it's true. If love is a supreme ethic, then freedom is implicit in that. And if God has fashioned a world in which the supreme ethic has to be there, the freedom to refuse to love God ought also to be there. Because if that freedom is not there, you're an automaton, and the automaton does not love. It conforms. And at the heart of what you and I are called to do is to be part of this world of love. Any time we raise the question of evil, it comes from a person. Personhood is essential to the raising of the very question. You cannot raise this question apart from personal worth and personal value. You assume in the question that the questioner is worthy of raising the question. And when he's talking about babies dying in tsunami or babies slaughtered out here and so on, he is questioning the moral fabric behind the universe because that baby that died is of essential worth. If values are intrinsic to personhood, how can there be an ultimate objective moral value without a person from whom that value comes? It's an important point. There is no way to disembody worth. So talk about values without personhood? You can't do it. So the two responses I make, objective moral values exist only if God exists. Objective moral values do exist because the question is raising it. Therefore, God exists. It is not possible to raise the question of value and worth without finding implicit in that question the value of personhood itself. And if the personhood has come from time plus matter plus chance, there is no essential value and worth to that person. It has to be the created entity of a valuable person himself, or an entity that is intrinsically valuable. That's what intrinsic worth is all about. It is so interesting that the same people like Samuel Harris and others who will talk about the tsunami and talk about Katrina and all of that, who are pro-abortionists and allow the slaughter of hundreds of millions of babies and don't consider it a question of values at all. How can that be? How can you say that a child within its mother's womb is not of essential worth and slaughter the innocent and then raise the question of God? Like the person in the Ohio State University who phoned me when I was on a live program, the astrophysicist. He and I were on this program together, and this woman just phoned in and said, I know what you men are all about anyway. And she was livid with us, and she said, you know, all you men are about and all this Christian faith is about is an anti-abortion stance. I said, wait a minute, we've not even talked about it. I said, we're answering questions in the age of the universe and you're talking about abortion. I said, we haven't even brought this up. She said, I know, that's where the agenda goes. That's what this Christianity is all about. I said, we didn't even mention it, ma'am. She said, but that's what it's all about. I said, all right, since you brought it up, I have a question for you. I said, you know, if a plane crashes, 90 people die and 10 people live, somebody in the university next day will say to me, what kind of God is this? What kind of God is this? He allows 90 to die and 10 to live. I said, just a moment ago, you raised the question that it is a moral right to do what you wanted with the child in your womb. I said, isn't that interesting? Tomorrow morning, if a plane crashes and 90 die and 10 live, you'll raise the question how God can choose so many to die and so many to live as his whim. But when you get a chance to decide who's going to live and who's going to die, you call it your moral right. She hung up. If good and evil can only be justified with the existence of God, enter Richard Dawkins. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky and won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely these properties we should expect to see if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. So Hitler was dancing to his DNA. He was not doing anything evil. What then becomes of the question? What they are really making of the question is an equivocation. What they are smuggling in is that they would recognize morality if they saw it. But they're not telling us that. They're just saying there's no morality because we don't see it. What they are saying hidden in that is, if there were morality, this is the way it would look like. So they are still bringing in an objective moral measuring point from which to make the castigation. You know what I find fascinating? These critics first argued against the cosmological argument. What was the cosmological argument? That anytime you see an effect, there is a cause. They say we don't have to have a cause for the universe. It could have just happened. Bertrand Russell, it's just there. Then they said that we don't have to look for a designer just because we see a design. The design, anything would look like a design. Isn't that interesting? You don't need a cause. You don't need a design. And then they tell you there can't be a God because the cause of evil is obvious. It is not God. God could not have done it, and we don't see any design. Therefore, there is no God. Knocking out cause and design, they are then giving a cause and a design for a world that would have looked different if they had constructed it. Why does it need a cause if not everything needs a cause? Why does it need a design if anything would look like design? So they knock off cause and design and then tell you they reject the universe because the evil that is there, because of the evil that is there, and the design is not actually there. Why can't anything look like a design? They start cheating on their own terms.